Welcome to your crash course in Annotated Bibliographies. I know that there are a lot of students that end up having questions about, how to write an annotation, how to even just, put that annotation together in a proper order. So that's what today's presentation is going to discuss. The end goal here is to get you comfortable with the concept of an annotated bibliography, how to construct it, and then what it's for, really. So what is a bibliography? So the bibliography, just a regular bibliography, is an alphabetic listing of resources that are consulted and used in researching a topic. So again, this is what typically goes at the end of a research paper, where you have an alphabetic listing, usually by author's last name, of all the resources that were used in the paper. So this is usually done for a couple of reasons. One is you always want to make sure that you are showing credit for the information that you used in your paper, and this process of citations is part of giving credit. And then also that allows other researchers that are reading your paper or your research to be able to try to replicate your research. So giving thorough enough information about the resources consulted will allow them to also trace your steps and follow the same path. So resources, each one is cited in such a way to make it easier for someone else to repeat it, read the same information. So the way you do this is essentially you consult worksheets for the types of information that should be included. So essentially you're going to be using APA citation format. 6th edition style is what we use, and the worksheets, again, Professor Huss's worksheets are going to be what will tell you the types of information that should be included in that, and that includes things like your author, the publication year, the article title, the journal title, the volume and issue information, the page number range, and for APA citations format, you also want to make sure you have what's called a DOI if it's available, which stands for Digital Object Identifier. So, for example, I listed below on this slide an example of what a article from the journal Social Work would look like. So again, your author comes first, author's last name, comma, first initial, then your publication year, then the title of your article, subtitle if it's there, then your journal title comes in italics, then your volume and issue information there, page number, and then DOI. And that's what a full citation looks like for a single resource. So now, what does a full bibliography look like? And again, so that was just one example of a single citation. So now here's an example of when you're stacking 3 citations together. And again, all 3 of these are articles from journals. They are listed alphabetically by the author's last name, and then you always want to have a hanging indent, which is essentially it's a paragraph formatting thing. You'll have the word references at the top centered, and then double space, Times New Roman, 12-point font, everything as you see it. So this is essentially what a bibliography looks like in APA citation format. Now, what's an annotated bibliography? So an annotation is just a summary and or evaluation. So therefore, an annotated bibliography includes a summary and or evaluation of each of those sources that are listed in your bibliography. So professors will often request different types of information in an annotation if they assign a project like this. So it is important to consult with whatever your assignment is to make sure that you're fulfilling the necessary requirements of the assignment. But in general, the information that you want to include in an annotation is a summary, an assessment, and a reflection of that particular resource. And again, you do this for each resource that you consult. So all of this information, by the way, is coming from Purdue University's online writing lab. It's also called OWL. So it's a really great resource to consult, not only for things like annotated bibliographies, but also for anything concerning writing, including your citations and things like that. And I'll give you a reference at the end of the presentation. But just to get a little bit more in depth about what a summary is, an assessment, and a reflection is. So your summary should be about a paragraph. Your annotations will summarize what the main point or topic of that resource is. So if someone asked you, what is this article slash book about? What would you say? So that's essentially what your summary is. Most students don't really have a problem with constructing a summary. It's usually when we get to the other two that I find that students tend to struggle a little bit with how to wrap their heads around it. So an assessment is you're going to evaluate the resource. So when you evaluate it, you have to take a look at essentially the value of the resource. So how do you know that it's a good resource? So this is where you're going to talk about things like whether or not the resource is biased, who the author is, what their credentials are, where do they work, how much experience do they have in the field, all that kind of thing. So this is where you're just evaluating or discussing how you know this resource is good. Okay. So now your reflection piece. Your reflection piece is where, after you've summarized and assessed, talk about why it fits. So again, a summary and an assessment is a little bit more sort of stepping away from the resource itself. You don't really have to be involved necessarily in it. The reflection is where you get involved. So the reflection is where you specifically state why the piece of information is important to you and your research. So this is where you'll talk about how it ties in with a particular argument you're making, or maybe it talks about how it's helpful in further explaining a particular aspect or topic, things like that. So this is the piece that gets a little personal. And again, these two, between assessment and a reflection, these two pieces are often really challenging for students. So now, what does an annotated bibliography look like? So on the left, I have sort of made up an annotation for one of the resources that I cited earlier. And don't assume that everything that I've put in here is actually real. Like literally, I just kind of typed up some stuff. So it's got three distinct pieces. The first piece is my summary. And again, this is where I'm discussing the main points of the paper, okay? And then my suggestion for how to do this yourself is read through the resource, either highlight it or make notes as you're going, and these become the main things that you pulled out as important. And that really becomes your summary. It's if you're discussing this with somebody else, why did you think it was important? And here is the summary of why it was important. The next piece, the assessment, again, find out more about the author, find out more about the publication. So where does the author work? What degrees do they hold? Have they published other information on the same topic? Are they members of any official organizations? Is the publisher or journal title well regarded? So does everybody in the field read it, essentially? Those are the kinds of things that you can use to assess the resource. And then again, finally, your reflection. And for our purposes, in this class, the reflection piece needs to be you tying this resource back to your textbook in some way. So if it was a resource that you found cited in your textbook, discuss that. So maybe you'll reflect on it in relation to, okay, here's what my textbook talked about, and here is how this argument either agrees or contradicts any statements that are made in the textbook versus what's in the article. And that's what you're going to do in the reflection piece for the assignments. And so when you're looking at this, you have your citation at the top, and again, it's just like you would see it in your bibliography, then your paragraphs, and then alphabetically, you would just go right on to your next article. And so they'd just be stacked on top of each other. Sort of makes a fairly large paper. If you've got 5 resources, I would imagine you're going to have 5 pages of content, about a page per resource. So why is this important? The whole point of doing an annotated bibliography or why your professor may assign it, there's a bunch of different reasons. So number one is your professor wants to see if you can recognize the difference between various types of resources. So when you're looking at a resource, when you go to cite it, the citation is very telling because the citation format is determined by the citation of the resource is determined by the format of the item. So if you're citing a book, it looks different from the way you would cite an article versus how you would cite a web page, etc. And if you can pull out and put in all the proper parts of a resource into a citation format, that also is telling. You know which piece is the article title, you know which piece is the journal title, you know which piece is the author, and you know where those all go. Next is, can you make intelligent decisions about your information usage in a college level research environment? So it means that on top of selecting resources and understanding what they are, do you understand which information is of the most value or should be used in a college level research paper? So not only are you able to select resources, but do you select good resources? And next, can you discuss information past a simple regurgitation? So oftentimes when professors assign research papers, it becomes sort of a habit that when you have to use information other than your own words, you just simply copy and paste a quote from a resource, plop it into your paper, and you're done with it. You don't really take the time to reflect on the information and why it's important. So being able to, instead of focusing on just, oh, I have to get 10 pages worth of research paper written, is can you focus on each resource individually and seriously think about the information that's being presented to you and then discuss it in an intelligent way. So an annotated bibliography is really good for that. It allows you to step away from the research paper and all of the worry of, sort of patchworking information together to create sort of a cohesive research paper and a cohesive voice. Whereas with an annotated bibliography, each of those resources is going to be focused just on that resource. So each little piece is more in depth, essentially. And then finally, can you compare information presented in one resource to another? So this goes back to your reflection piece. Can you take a look at the information presented in one resource? So let's say an article from a journal. Can you compare that information to your textbook? Can you talk about why they're different, why they have some similar ideas or theories? Can you say why they're the same or why one supports the other? And that's the kind of thing where in an annotated bibliography that helps to kind of get you in that habit of comparing information. And again, that comes back to understanding the information and past a regurgitation. So finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is resources that you can use that are going to help you construct a well thought out annotated bibliography. So first off, again, I recommended it earlier. Purdue OWL is an invaluable resource. The link that I provided is actually a direct link to annotated bibliography samples, and those are listed in MLA and APA and I think Chicago format. So you'll actually be able to see samples of what an annotated bibliography might look like. Now on top of that, Purdue OWL also has really great information on how to just simply cite your sources to begin with. So citing your sources, again, comes back to making sure you're using proper citation style, which your professor is going to be requesting you to use APA 6th edition. And all the information regarding how to cite your sources in that style is really well thought out on the Purdue website. So you'll be able to not only see the format style, but then you'll also see examples of how that will look. So I find it to be incredibly useful to use Purdue OWL for anything regarding writing. And then finally, the other resource that I'll point out to you is the SUNY Morrisville Library's website. Under the Get Help section, under citation guides, we have both MLA and APA citation style guides for your in-text citations, and then also for your references list. So this will be sort of a short worksheet guide for how to cite your sources in those two primary formats. We also list links for Chicago style, although that's not used as often. Again, the two big ones are MLA and APA. And so that kind of brings me to the end of my discussion here, sort of talking about annotated bibliographies in a way that hopefully makes sense so that you understand the assignment and that you understand why you're doing the assignment. And again, it all comes back to being able to critically look at the content that you're digesting and then be able to pull that information out, organize it, and then be thoughtful about it, which I think is really what your professor is after. If you do have any questions, you can always contact me via email or come see me on Wednesdays. My email address is rhodesam, RHODESAM, @morrisville.edu. I have business cards that are also down in the library on the service desk there. And again, either that or come and see me in person on Wednesday if you have any questions. Thanks and good luck.